the conversation. It's the conversation. Y'all ready? Let's go. No filter, no restrictions. You about to get my opinion in its purest form. So my words, don't try to spin them. What I said is what I said. And what I said, I meant it. The gloves are off now when I'm coming out swinging. So engage in verbal combat, but you better be ready. Cause this here for me is light work, even if the topic's heavy. I'm ready for it all with no running from nothing. You just take the time to digest what I put in, no rushing. But time is moving, don't waste it. You want the real, come and face it. Come sit and talk to me if you want it straight without a chaser. And it might burn a little when you step on up to taste it. But it's nothing harsh, I promise. Just a little conversation.
Action. I don't know what's going on with that. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the conversation with Harold and Dave. Right now, it's me and Harold. Dave will be on in a little bit. Well, we're going to start. Then he'll hop on because he has some very important things that he wants to talk about in the Ukraine update. But the big thing that we want to start with is education. And who better to talk about what's going on with the education than you, Harold?
Well, I won't say who's best, but at least I do have a position as well as and using my profession to discuss this matter and share the concerns that I have with the current push of this administration and legislation that they're definitely pushing out there. But I'm trying to understand and wrestle with these and understanding the Constitution
Mhm.
and the true power that they have to do what they're doing. But let's talk about it.
Well, before we get heavily into it, I know we've done this eons ago. This show's been on for about over almost 3 years now. Kind of give us, for people who don't know you and they just don't think you're talking, your background in education.
Well, me personally, I'm a 20 plus year educator and administrator within the public school system. Uh, Predominantly, majority of my career has been dealing with really middle school and K-8s. But nonetheless, all of it, when you understand it in its entirety, are interconnected in many respects. In addition to that, because I love learning, I attained also multiple degrees in the areas of not just education, but religion as well as business administration. So when it comes to loving learning, I guess I could say, I'm always open to doing it, and it's important that I encourage other people. I don't look at myself any differently than anyone else. I just had different pursuits, and I pursued them. I encourage people to learn whatever you can learn throughout life, so that as time moves on, you don't have some of the information that's going out there. You become susceptible to it because you've done some of the homework, you've done some of the research, and now when you hear things or see things being put out into the quote unquote universe, you can respond to it intelligently, or it gives you now a means or desire to go back and do that additional research so that you can be better informed, whether it's a thumbs up or thumbs down related to that particular matter.
What always gets me, especially when the news first comes out, it's never anything specifics. It's just here comes the budget cuts. Here comes cuts. You just hear the word cuts in the beginning. That's what we heard a couple weeks ago, and then the cuts start get a little more specific as the weeks go by. Talking about 13 to 1,600 jobs. Talking about cutting the amount of substitute teachers. And the biggest thing that people don't think about is the two biggest trickle effects that it has is the rural areas, which I'm sorry, the reddest states that voted for this administration are the ones who are the back end when they rank the 50 states in terms of education. So again, it's like he's hurting his own base with these cuts. So people don't think about the resources. It happens every time there are cuts. I mean, when you and we're not the same age, but you remember free lunch was more prevalent when you were growing up. It was more prevalent when I was growing up. Now you've really got to be down and out to receive a free lunch from school. And some schools don't even offer those types of programs. Kids should never be sitting in school hungry. How are they going to focus on their education? But one of the deciding factors that he uses and they use in the arguments is the curriculum. And I see people fighting about the curriculum, and it's like, guys, the government doesn't legislate the curriculum. The Department of Education doesn't legislate the curriculum. If you have a problem with the curriculum, Harold, who should you be addressing?
Well, they need to talk to their state Department of Education to address the issues of curriculum, more so than anything else. Because the federal government, all they do is provide funding for
Mhm.
programs. I'll say that again. They provide funding for programs. What do you mean? Title One, Title IX, those are programs. Title One helps provide additional funding for low income communities so that you can help, again, address some of the issues and provide additional services to those students who may be impacted adversely within those communities. Title IX, that deals with the issue of gender and making sure that there's adequate funding there to deal with quote unquote gender issues in education and making sure that we have a level, if we can call it that, playing field so that even when we're talking about athletics, there is funding to support female athletic programs as well. Now, in addition to that, it does, as you alluded to earlier, fund the free breakfast and free lunch programs. Again, this is helping poor families um, get access to maybe what may be the only two meals they have that day. So it's scary to think that these individuals who claim to care about children, who claim to care about people, uh, would actually support these types of cuts that are going to be detrimental if they hold. Now I know where we are. The House released a bill. It went over to the Senate. The Senate has kind of touched it up and made some modifications that they just recently approved. I guess it was a 51-50 vote. And now it's got to go back to the House to see if the House will accept the changes that the Senate made, which the House, I think when they passed, it was like 214 to 210, it was about 3 or 4 votes that they were able to successfully pass this particular bill the first time around.
Mhm.
So it's not it's not a landslide vote or of support for this initiative. However, at the end of the day, what I'm afraid of is when we're looking at these types of bills, and I know we're talking about the big, beautiful bill and its impact on education, but when we talk about this type of legislation, we're only talking about the stuff that they want you to talk about, or people tend to focus on most. There are other things that are even just more deadly or detrimental that are within this bill as well. But education, you know, how do we improve the quality of education in our schools if we're taking away funding? And I think I've said this before on a previous show, and I'll say it again. Something is wrong, and we have a priority problem in America when you can spend $30,000 to $50,000 incarcerating an individual, and you got to fight to spend $10,000 to educate a child. Something is wrong with that.
Say that part one time about because you've said it before, but you froze a little bit, and it's an important statement that you just made.
Okay.
Harrison, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, basically, what I said was we have a priority problem in America. When we pay $30,000 to $50,000 a year to incarcerate individuals, but we got to fight to get $10,000 a year to educate a child. Something is wrong, and we have a priority problem in America.
Well, one thing again that we don't when we're talking about the trickle effect. Now we're talking about poor kids, and you'll have people argue, that stupid argument of, well, both their parents need to get better jobs. We're not even going to go down that road. Okay, there's so many things wrong with that statement. But one thing that we're also missing is special education. Sometimes when you have lower income families, they have they give birth to special needs kids.
Yes.
And how do you get that special needs kid educated and handled throughout the day if the funding is being cut? So that means less special education teachers and less resources to take care of those special needs kids. No
Correct.
one talks about that part.
And again, when we talk about programs, on what I alluded to earlier, that is one of the programs that is funded by the federal government. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't state or local dollars that can assist in that. But again, the federal government only funds programs. Now, if
Mhm.
those programs need to be need added resources, that's where additional state and local funding will come into play. But if you don't have the funding, then you don't have the teachers. You can't make the accommodations because those very accommodations, some children need a one-to-one para or paraprofessional to
Mhm.
work with them throughout the day. So it takes resources.
I feel like they want everybody to be homeschooled at this point. Like, we're just not going to have any schools. I know I'm being silly, but that's what I feel like. Uh, One of the big issues, and we talk about people that are impoverished or need not only free lunch, but there's also reduced lunch to help fund them. We talked about special needs. Another thing we talk about, cutting budgets and spending in education, still it doesn't equate to the teachers and the aides that are being left over getting any type of raises. So what are you doing with the education dollars that are being cut? You're
Well,
not
again,
providing extra income to the people that are left behind. To the education system in a lot of places are already undermanned. Is that am I incorrect with that? Especially in major cities, you know.
they're already behind, and if you cut additional funding, that means now the state is going to have to come up some way, shape, or form with that shortfall if they choose to. Now,
Mhm.
there's some states like Florida that are even talking about not taxing property owners on their primary residence, on their homestead residence, which is asinine because that's where the majority of the money that supports education come from. When you talk about localized efforts, that's where those dollars, property taxes, those dollars cover not just education, but they cover law enforcement, fire. They help support and sustain municipalities within various counties around the state of Florida as well as around the country. So when you hear of these ideas, quote unquote, it's all about a money grab. I'm gonna tax the people who need it most, and then I'm
Mhm.
gonna give relief to the people who don't need it, meaning the billionaires and millionaires that are out there. So it's really a backwards mindset. I can't even speak to where it came from or how we got here. But we're here now. We got to fight.
How does it? Well, it doesn't affect. You correct me if I'm wrong, because this mainly affects public uh, education. I don't know how it affects charter school. You'd be one to tell me more like about that. How does this affect charter schools?
Well, again, right now in the state of Florida, charter schools charter schools won't be impacted as much. And the reason why I say that is they have access to public school dollars, but public schools don't have access to their dollars. So their impact is going to be minimal. Not only that, but they also have the right or the ability to discriminate and not even enroll any child that has special needs within the state of Florida. I can only speak to Florida at this point because I haven't researched any other states.
Charter school always kind of teeters on that line of private public. They teeter in that in between balance, and depending on the charter school, wherever you live and where you go, sometimes you can't tell if it's a private school or a public school when you go in there. Um, I know private schools, the impact is totally different than it is with public and private school. Of course, lower income families don't go to private school primarily. Now, you and I both know personally, my sister, for instance, single mom of 4 kids, she works for the library system, Miami Dade. It's not a lot of money, but she paid to have all of her kids attend private school. And that's a lot of money. She spent every single cent that she had, plus whatever we could provide to send her kids to private school. So everyone doesn't have that support system that can come and help them attend these type of schools, and everyone's not set up to have a kid to be homeschooled. Uh,
Right.
my biggest problem is it starts from having a person, and this is I don't want to poop on Linda McMahon, but having a person who knows nothing about the education system be in charge of the Department of Education.
Well, I mean, it's our second rodeo. We did the same thing with the previous education chair, who was clueless, really about running a school, and had no education background outside of the fact that she owned. It was either a charter school or a charter school company, one or the other. But being the owner doesn't mean you know really about the inner workings of the actual school. That means you brought in people who were capable and competent, allegedly, to run said school to the best of its ability. However, when we again go back and look at funding, look at these opportunities, you know, private schools aren't built for everybody. And like you mentioned, the affordability piece. Now, my niece, your sister, was blessed in the sense that she did have a support system. Not only that, but she had some very gifted children that were also given scholarships to attend those institutions. So, she was blessed in many respects. And I'm grateful that she did have the support. But
Mhm.
then, I've heard the other side of that, where I've had families who were able to pay full, full, full tuition for at the same school, and they weren't satisfied with the results. You know,
Mhm.
because of certain cultural dynamics, or at the absence of certain cultural dynamics that existed. I've been approached by many people in various schools, both charter and private, as it relates to it. And I'm going to always speak on understanding the culture of all of your students, not just some, because that plays a pivotal role in their development as they matriculate through those institutions. And, I think like I said, your sister's fortunate in that uh, that did not become an issue in her situation. However, I know others, that did have some challenges as it relates to that.
And we think about the sports. But before I say that, you were talking about we'll spend $50,000 to fund
Incarcerate.
incarcerate someone, but we're having a heart attack, about $10,000 a year per child. I was just reading something about some deportees being sent to African prisons because their own countries will not take the deportation. I guarantee you, we're not sending them there for free. I
No one.
guarantee you that country is not taking them on for free.
Well, remember, and even this new thing we got here in Florida called alligator Alcatraz, or whatever they want to call it.
Uh-huh.
It's not a free institution. And let me remind people, in case whether they knew or didn't know, when we had that debacle beginning in 2016, where children were being separated from their parents at the border, and those children were being whisked away from the border via airplane to all across the country to these different detention centers. Those centers were receiving $775 per day per child. And when you do the math, you're looking at over $250,000 per year. That child stayed there a year at that institution. So it had nothing to do with immigration. This is a money grab that if we don't step back and get out of the politics of it and look at the profitability of it, we're going to miss the true essence of what's really happening. And the scary part about it is we want to say immigration, immigration, immigration. We want to say we need to be more efficient. Well, there's ways. I mean, think about it. Since 2016, now this is going back to 2016. If we wanted to be more efficient, we could have done that by attrition alone. People retire every year. You don't have to refill those positions. So let's look at how many people technically could have retired, how many positions you already had vacant. And that could have actually, when we're talking about downsizing, that would have been a strategy or more appropriate strategy that should have been implemented. But to sit up and fire people who are giving their blood, sweat, and tears, we've now, the
You know,
Supreme Court has now okayed or backed the firing of 1,400 employees at the Department of Education?
here's the
Something
thing
to
that
that effect.
bothers me like that. It's like getting fired on a Friday instead of a Monday. I mean, sorry, uh, fire me on a Friday. Don't fire me on a Monday, right? We've had all summer, right? If you wanted to do this, which is still stupid to do, why isn't this done 2 months ago, 3 months ago? The school year is just get around the corner, and now this comes up. So you have people stressed out, don't know if they have a job that they're coming to when the school year comes on. And then what happens if you prepare yourself to get employed somewhere else, and then your job's like, "Hey, what are you doing, Harold? What do you mean?" Well, there's uncertainty. I don't know what's happening. Who decides who gets cut? It's just so much. And one of the things we talked about meals, we talked about we brazed on Title IX, but a lot of avenues for lower income families is sports programs, after school programs for that family that mom and dad do have to work. and that kid's staying at an after school program or getting into sports. We know sports is a pathway to getting people to do that in certain places instead of going on the streets. So that's another trickling effect that we have. But what I wanted to ask you was, as an educator, what haven't we talked about that's an outcome from this that people are not thinking about as well? Do you have anything else that we're just everyday people like me who don't work in education are not understanding what this will affect? We know lunches, we know resources, we know special education, all those things, but is there anything else that we're kind of missing?
Well, I think we're not looking at down the road. If you have a less educated society, that's going to cause actually your earning potential to decline as well. If you don't have the educational experience, now instead of me paying you for example, 60,000 a year, I can say, well, you're only worth 40 to me. You're
Is
only
that
worth 35 to me.
is that a way to get Americans back to taking the lower jobs? That so remember we talked about this when it dealt with immigrations a long time ago. It was us, it was the Irish. It's always somebody taking those jobs, but as people get a better sense of life for themselves, they save money, they're able to send their kids to higher education, certain sect of people stop doing those jobs, right? And a lot of those jobs immigrants are doing. Is this the way to get us back to doing those jobs, getting back to making the same people in oligarchies the amount of money that they need to make? Like, I just don't understand. I know I'm throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks because this is just I just don't understand what's happening.
Well, it's not actually getting them to make the same money they made, because remember, inflation is always going to be there.
Mhm.
You're actually going to be making more and more, and it increases that wealth gap that we hear about but don't focus on.
Uh,
When you look at the fact that, yeah, these people who are, I mean, the corporate greed is unquestionable, but more importantly, it's undeniable. They don't care about you, me, or how you get along. I've been talking to a number of institutions recently, and I've been telling organizations, listen, I need y'all to get off the affordable housing tip, and y'all need to get on the affordable home ownership tip. The affordable home ownership does two things that help not just our society, but help the individual. Number one, it puts them in a position to where now they can begin to build, or gives them a floor to build economic wealth, or generational wealth, as we normally refer to it. That's number one. And number two, as you're paying property taxes, now you're putting back into your community, the very community that you live in. I have nothing against affordable housing personally, but I'm looking at the economic impact of affordable housing and how it's being utilized. And so when I hear the federal government now, we're going to cut back this and cut back that, and now municipalities, for example, like Miami-Dade County, are faced with a multi-$100 million shortfall that they got to now figure out how they're going to make happen. We got to sit back and say, okay, wait a minute. My remedy was, if you all had not allowed these developers to build all of these rental units and force them to build housing units where people could purchase, then one, they're contributing to the tax base, which generates revenue for the community. Number two, if I got a 300 unit rental property, and because I've given all of these tax breaks and tax incentives to the developer, they're not going to be paying back into the tax base, even though those new 300 residents are going to be needing access to the resources. They're going to need access to police. They're going to need access to fire. They need access to water, sewer, and all those the utilities. They need access. But there's no revenue coming now for the next few years because of all the tax breaks and tax incentives that we've given developers over time. So we've shot ourselves in the foot in many respects by kowtowing to developers. But it's time for us to call it out for what it is, right that ship, so that we can move forward and help our community. Because again, those same property taxes will be funding our education, our schools. So they'll have the additional revenue. So regardless of if the current administration decides they're going to keep going in the direction that they're headed, it won't matter. You got the resources already made, and that was just really gravy to help you implement your programs. I hope I said enough.
You said enough. You didn't land your plane. I only think you land your plane when Dave's here. Uh, Dave's actually coming from the airport. You came from the airport. You're both coming from airports today. You came from the airport early today and dealt with that wonderful, 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 wonderful Miami traffic
Hey,
uh,
love
that you
it.
had to deal with. Uh, I, the Supreme Court saying it's okay also bothers me. Like it's just I don't
Well,
understand.
my struggle with the Supreme Court lately has been, my understanding of judges is their goal is to interpret law. I mean,
Mhm.
correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's their job. Just interpret law. It's not
Their
about
job is to interpret the law.
not about their feelings. That's why sometimes when we get away with things happening that are unconstitutional, like you talked about earlier today, people that live in the District of Columbia paying taxes, but they don't have
No
representation.
representation. Right.
Um, that's what makes me think. But go ahead with your thought. I just remember that from earlier.
Yeah. No worries. No, but my issue here is, and we did hit on it earlier as well when we talked, is the fact that I share with you that executive orders are not laws.
Correct.
So how do we get a Supreme Court to stand behind an executive order, which isn't a law, which wasn't passed by Congress, which wasn't ratified by the president's signature, to now say he can act alone and enforce all of these changes to the detriment of our society?
Well, is it because an executive, if they're trying to
It's
determine
not a law.
executive order is unconstitutional, I think whether it's a law or not, is it something that you can do that's unconstitutional? For instance, he can't make an executive order that says we now have to segregate schools. That would be unconstitutional. Um,
Yeah, but many of even him trying to do an executive order dealing with, say, citizenship,
mhm,
the Constitution clearly tells us about the rights of citizenship.
mhm.
But when he's out here trying to revoke that, i.e., the only means that he has or the only tool at his disposal would be executive order. So there are a number of things that he has done that were supposed to, based on the Constitution, it should have gone to Congress to address. Even some of the stuff that he's doing with immigration, that's supposed to have gone to Congress. But if I keep this thing, he wants to keep it in a certain place. He doesn't want it resolved. And he's not trying to resolve it. Because if he would have said, listen, make sure you guys pass some immigration laws within this next bill that you guys are going to be pushing forward so that we can move this thing down the road. And that's not his intent. His intent is to continue to, again, grab as big of a purse as he can, help out those that support him by creating these other little quote unquote detention centers all over the United States. And as he keeps them filled, they're going to be funded. And
You
I
know,
land my plane.
how come? And this is not me getting on police. I'm not getting into police tirade, but the amount of people that I've seen get incensed when anyone mentions defund the police, I see way more anger than when I see people talking about defunding education.
Well, again, it depends on which side of the coin you're on. And not only that, but that whole notion of defunding the police had nothing to do with taking money out of police departments.
Yeah, a lot of
It
people didn't
had
understand.
it had to do with reallocating certain amount of funds so that you can address other issues within our society through law enforcement. For example, in Miami-Dade County, we have a mental health police unit. So if there's a 911 call of someone having a mental health episode, you respond or dispatch those officers who are specialized in that, and not an officer that only has the gun, the badge, and the stick that may not necessarily end up well with that individual whom they're responding to.
And I think that's what when people don't research and understand what things mean, when people that were railing against it would hear defund police, they just think that means take all the money from the police. No, that would be insane. No one's asking for that to happen. Um,
But
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 you
but the
also, those same people would be irate to understand that every time that those payouts for things that were happening that shouldn't have happened, that comes out of the taxpayers' dollars. But
correct.
go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say I find it ironic as well as hypocritical when I hear certain Congress people on the right uh, talk about defunding the FBI because the FBI was investigating a certain individual that they didn't want investigated. So we can't have it both ways. One
Mhm.
minute you're crying that we shouldn't be defunding police, and the next minute, because they're not doing what you want them to do or desire for them to do, you're now having those individuals um, cry to defund this particular law enforcement agency over others. So it's interesting when we sit back and look at it.
It's very interesting, very very interesting. I had a question for you while you're saying that, and I totally lost um, what I was going to say. One thing I was waiting on Dave, in case he got here, was in the title that we were talking about is also the attack on public broadcasting. So we talked
Mm.
about that. That's part of the budget cuts, and people understanding that public broadcasting cuts would affect NPR, things like PBS that have been around forever. And when you're looking at the stations that would be affected in the list, it's all public information stations. It's all public information stations that they don't matter what side of a coin you are. If you have information, especially educational information, you're able to present that on these stations. Well, I'm being facetious when I say this, but why the attack on public broadcasting?
Well, first of all, it's interesting. The initial funding was, I want to say, signed by Lyndon Johnson in '67. Congress decided they wanted to fund public radio, public TV, which led to the evolution of, and I think right around 1970, PBS and NPR. Well, the purpose of those stations were to be one, unbiased, to share information, public information, to the public. And so throughout the years, not only have they done that, they've also uh, embraced education as part of its programming, which is how we ended up with Sesame Street and a few other
Mhm.
programs. Electric Company. I can't. Don't make me call the roll because I'll miss some. But we had those fun programs that I grew up on. You grew up on them as well, and there are new ones now that children are benefiting from through again public education funding for broadcasting. Now, unfortunately, uh, there's certain sect of our population that don't like the truth, and if they're supposed to be unbiased, then they have to give you the truth, regardless of who it hits or who it impacts and how it impacts. And what we've learned is now through these efforts of certain individuals, both Congress personnel as well as executive members of the executive branch, they don't like the truth. They want to do whatever they can to suppress the truth. And as I expressed to you earlier, uh, when it comes to authoritarian dictators, those individuals attack three things. First,
Mhm.
they attack they grab the military, they
Mhm.
grab the media, and then
Mhm.
they grab the money.
And then, I always add that fourth one in there, education. And look where we're at. And I use the example of Hawaii. Before Hawaii became a state, when Hawaii became a state, what's the first thing that natural born Hawaiians would tell you to do? The first thing to do is stop teaching anything about Hawaiian culture in schools.
Yeah,
Even
call
squash
people.
speaking of the native tongue. So, I mean, that's just something that you do. Some people don't understand you can't live in a democracy that has dictatorship tendencies. And it's crazy that you bring up Lyndon Johnson, because Lyndon Johnson was the one who declared higher education is no longer a luxury, but a necessity. Okay. And one of the things he said, if he had to choose, how did it go? If he had to choose between a good hospital, a good school, and a good aircraft character, aircraft carrier, I'll take the good hospital and the good school every time, because free citizens should have the right to education and higher education, especially if they're lower to middle income. I can't remember the quote he said about how much an aircraft carrier costs versus a hospital and school, but I remember it was staggering when he made those comments.
Yeah, I
I'm
can only
actually,
imagine.
we'll see
When
if I,
you look at it.
go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Finish your thoughts. I'm
No,
sorry.
that I said I'm going to look up what he said about the actual costs at that time, because it was a very. You've said it before on here too. Um, Here we go. It's right here. Lyndon B. Johnson Hospital. No, not that one. The cost of building at the time, a cost of building a school can vary significantly. On average, the cost of building a school ranges from $295 to $756 per square foot. Elementary schools are generally simpler and typically cost between 15 and 25 million to be built. High schools often feature specialized spaces, and athletic facilities can exceed 50 million in construction. A Nimitz class aircraft carrier costs $4.5 billion. The newer
Each.
Gerald R. Ford, yep, classic aircraft carrier costs $13 billion. So if you can build an elementary school for 15 to 25 million, and you can build a high school for 50 million, how many of those sons of bitches can you build with $13 billion?
A few thousand. I'll leave it there. A few
I'm no
thousand.
mathematician, but come on.
No, it's a few hundred. I'm sorry. You got it. But, and I agree with you 100%. We got to step back and reprioritize our nation, because right now we've allowed certain things, and it's sickening to me when I hear people say, well, I didn't vote for that. I didn't vote for that. Well, you had to, because it was all wrapped up in the same package. It was in the same Christmas present. And you may not have looked at or paid attention to or chose to willfully ignore that aspect of what was being proffered. But you can't say you didn't vote for it if it was a part of, it's like me saying, well, I voted for buying the blue car, but I didn't want the white wall tires, even though the car had white wall tires on it. Well, why'd you buy the car?
He said, when they say that, I say they have no excuse, because he said exactly what he was going to do and he did it. And
It's
for people who don't understand, we argued about this in the beginning when he kept talking about tariffs, and everybody that was in favor were pumping their fists. And I was like, tell me you don't know how tariffs work without telling me you don't know how tariffs work.
yeah,
Every
it's
economist
inexcusable.
said this is a terrible idea. But
Wait. And
I
they
was,
reminded us of the damage tariffs did during the Great Depression, how it deepened the recession during the Great Depression.
Mhm.
They
but
told
why?
us.
But why listen to an economist talk about the economy, but you can listen to a person who's never worked in education be in charge of the Department of Education? Make it make sense.
Well, I mean, you got a person they've labeled a businessman when well, we know about bankruptcy and all that other stuff, but he's tanked every business he's just about that he's had.
And I'm going to stick on her for a second, because I'm watching Senate hearings and I'm watching people, I'm not talking about Trump for a second, because that's the easy target. I'm tired of talking for a minute. I'm talking about different people in his administration. I know you
Hmm.
had, but I'm watching different people in this administration go to Senate hearings and have no idea what they're talking about, even when I've seen Republican senators try to softball it in to help them. And I'm looking at them like, if this was any other person at a job, their supervisor would be embarrassed and they'd be fired.
Well,
The
I
level
mean,
of competency is staggering.
think about Miss McMahon, who's over education. When she was given the question about the Tulsa massacre,
Ah,
she was asked another question
yes.
about Ruby Bridges.
Mhm.
And you want to tell me you don't know who or what those two things are and that you've never heard of them, and they're two of the most significant events and individuals of modern society. I mean, I was amazed when even I think just right after COVID, I think it was 2020, well, no, during COVID, 2021, when Tom Hanks came out on a viral video saying he had just learned about the 100th anniversary of Tulsa in 1920, which happened in 1921,
Mm-hmm.
and 2021, he had never heard of it, but he wanted to learn more about it, and so I can understand you saying you've never heard of it once, but during
Well,
that time, that's all that was being talked about. It was multiple documentaries that came out that same year, and unless you're living in a black hole,
okay.
I don't see it.
Hmm.
I don't see it.
Okay. I'm totally on board with you. Let's say I'm going to be devil's advocate that you didn't watch the documentary, you didn't see it. I mean, I get it. You were Vince McMahon's husband. You guys are running the WWE, WWF at the time. It's very busy. You don't get to watch everything and be aware of everything. God, let's just say that, even though all of that is silly, what I just said.
I'm gonna
This
let you
was
say
my
it.
favorite back and forth from the Senate hearing, where Senator Mullen, Republican from Oklahoma, teed up McMahon with a simple question to tout the changes she's made to the department, only for her to stumble. She failed to answer correctly. He said, "What were we ranked in reading and math in 1979?" Now, people might say, well, "Why is he asking a question from back then?" You're the leader of the Department of Education. You should know those basic stats. That's something that's grilled. You should know this, right? She said, "I'm sorry, what?" He said, "What were we ranked?" That's a problem within itself. Nationally in math and reading in 1979. He repeated, "We were very, very low on the totem pole," Linda McMahon said. He replied, "We were number one in 1979.
I remember
Oh,
that
in
question,
1979. Okay, I'm sorry. Uh, I just,
bro. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you.
the
But
guy
the other thing
wasn't
we haven't done. Think about
told.
this. Since the
Read it.
passing of the No Child Left Behind Act,
Uh-huh.
which was passed through Congress without funding, No Child Left Behind, 2002, passed, no funding,
Wait, hold
no
on.
modern. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, no, because I just want to. We're talking about the leader of the Department of Education, right?
Hmm.
I'm not saying you need to be a Harvard graduate, but what came after that was this. Senator, our favorite senator, John F. Kennedy, not F. Kennedy, John Kennedy, asserted that the government had been spending 1.5 billion a year for 10 years of federal grant programs for disadvantaged students. Well, if they did, so what? Kennedy claimed the math added up to more than $1 trillion to no objection from Miss McMahon, who appeared to have trouble doing the math herself when asked to clarify by Senator Jack Reed. "Madam Secretary, I'm not a great mathematician, but I think we're talking about $1 trillion," he said. "I believe 1.5 billion times 10 is 15 billion. That's a little bit off from $1 trillion. I think the budget cuts 1.2 billion," McMahon replied. "Well, 1.2, that would be 12 billion, not $1 trillion," Reed said. Nothing that math still doesn't add up. I'm just like, what is that? So that hearing was how long ago? So you could already see the seeds were sown. They were trying to figure out ways back then to start cutting money. Bringing up that $15 billion has been spent on disadvantaged students. Okay, and I know you have no words because it's just stupid.
There are no words. There are no words. None. None. I'm not going to make any up. I'm not going to try to insert any. Nope. There are none.
And it's right there. And I love what well, I tell people all the time: go read transcripts. Stop telling me what these people mean. I have a friend that she blocked me on Facebook because I posted that Trump said whoever signed the trade agreements with Canada and Mexico, these are the worst deals ever. Whoever signed this, it's just he said it's basically stupid. And then they had to remind him that he's the one that made the deal. And in the video, he said it's the greatest deal that was ever made. And she said, "Well, where'd you get that from? The horse's mouth." He said it
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah.
So, well, maybe he meant, don't tell me what he means. Don't tell me what Linda McMahon means. Stop telling me what people mean. I'm an adult. I can hear.
Well, see, the problem is when he does it himself, they can't blame Biden.
Ah,
You've really subtracted their go-to
mm,
when you put his words against himself.
mm,
Can't say, well, Biden did this about no. It was his agreement. It's
mhm.
almost akin to there was an interview with Bill O'Reilly the other day. I want to say yesterday or the day before, where he accused the Biden administration of not following through on convicting uh, uh, Epstein. And when the host reminded him that, first of all, Epstein was arrested and jailed in 2019, and then he committed suicide in 2019. Biden didn't become president until 2021. How could it be, he tried to blame Merrick Garland for not following through. And then it took literally 3, if not 4 different exchanges before he finally realized that he was in error. And the only thing he could say after that point was pretty much he misspoke. You were insistent on it. So again, when you take away their the ability to blame Biden, it's almost like, when you eat that Frosty and you get a brain freeze, that's what happens. And they have to move forward. But I don't want to get too far off into that particular direction. But going back to education, when we look at what's happening with education, the scary part about it is people don't realize the real world impact it's going to have on the next 2 generations at best, or at worst. Well, I won't say at worst, but at best.
Mhm.
If we don't change this, and like I said, even though these are not laws that are being passed,
Mhm.
but what's going to happen? The next Democrat president's going to have to come in and clean up all of this. The same way after COVID, Biden had to come in. America voted to put Biden in to clean up the mess from COVID.
It's when you look at, like, we talk about the mess financially in the economy, and someone was talking about, well, the economy wasn't that bad his first time around. I said, well, by the beginning of the economy, it was bad for 2 reasons. One, we know we had the pandemic. We can't blame the pandemic on Trump. The handling of the pandemic is what we always talk about. People think we
Right.
blame the pandemic on Trump. No, that would be stupid. The handling of it. Who was present when all these ridiculous PPP loans were given out and just approved all over the place?
And you had members of Congress, which is a major conflict of interest,
Mhm.
approved for the what? Forgiveness of those very PPP loans.
Yep. But if
And
I
they
would have,
were able to receive funds themselves.
yep. But if I did it, I had to get on a payment plan to pay it back.
Well, I mean, think about it. We used to have these,
Because the
huh?
biggest thing they always talk about when Doge came in was how the government handles funds and processes funds. The process to getting a PP loan was so easy that any fool with a laptop an internet service was getting a PPP loan, and some of these people for millions of dollars.
Yeah, but then you had certain institutions that were still utilizing racism to prevent certain business people who had legitimate businesses from getting those very loans because they were harboring those dollars or hoarding those dollars for their friends. And I'm well aware of what happened here in Miami-Dade County, in a number of different institutions where that happened.
Yeah, that's also crazy to me because again, I'm talking about people. Junebug down the street was getting an $800,000 PPP loan, and this man ain't worked in 5 years, but he was able to write up and apply for it and get 800,000.
Yeah, well, now they're looking for Junebug, so I hope
So
Junebug ain't out there.
but that goes back to my point of how is this person even getting approved?
No, I agree. Again, it's all about a money grab.
Mhm.
And those that write the rules can then decide how those rules will be implemented.
But let's land the plane on this.
Land it.
And I'm gonna leave rich people out of it. I'm gonna leave government officials out of it. Those everyday Joes like me who got approved for 500, 800,000, 1.2, 2.3, all these stories that you can see verified stories, $3 million that ain't getting paid back. Who's paying that back? Who's paying that back? Go ahead. Give the people in the back the answer. Who's paying that back? Who's paying for that?
Taxpayers got to pay it back. Bottom line, if the individuals can't pay it back, we're going to end up having to pay it as taxpayers.
As taxpayers. Thank y'all. Y'all have a good night.